Welcome back. It is now my honor to welcome to the podium Sylvia Rode. Did I pronounce that right, Sylvia?
Very good.
Thank you. Dr. Sylvia Rode chairs the World Language and Cultures Department and serves on the board of the Center for Communal Studies at the University of Southern Indiana. I want to do a shout out for our friend Don Pitzer. Are you in the audience who established the center? And Don was a fearless supporter of our book. When everyone, including us, thought it was never going to come out, he charged forward and read through the manuscript. So thanks again, Don. So Sylvia, her research on utopianism includes utopian concepts between World War I and World War II, theories on urbanism in 19th century communal societies. She is the author of Franz Werfel, Star of the Unborn, Utopia as Fictional Genre of Discourse and Intellectual History. And she has recently completed a manuscript on George, entitled George Rapp's Thought on the Destiny of Man, a Critical Study. Please join us in welcoming Sylvia.
Thank you for your kind introduction. The Harmonists constituted a group of religious utopians who immigrated from southern Germany, namely from the Duchy of Württemberg, to the United States of America to practice a communal socialism in the pursuit of the American capitalist dream while anticipating the second coming of Christ. And here you see the city of Iptingen. It's not much bigger than New Harmony. I visited there in 2011, and I will show you a few more pictures of the town that I took. When George Rapp arrived with his followers in the United States of America in 1803, his religious visions had already been voiced in court documents and fragmented pieces of writings. But it was not until the community had settled in New Harmony, Indiana, that George Rapp's essay entitled Thoughts on the Destiny of Men, in which he articulated his operational plan for a divine economy, appeared in print. Today's presentation focuses on the Harmonists' successful merger of such seemingly opposing theories as capitalism and socialism, and the effective negotiation of contradictions within the spiritual realm of millennial beliefs, the practice of an intercommunal socialism, and external capitalist enterprising by strictly adhering to a tri-spherical operational model. In her autobiographical travelogue, Luise Weil, the daughter of a German minister who spent 18 months with the Harmonists, she describes the society as follows, and I quote, "They are devout Christians living in an abundant paradise, not of a tropical nature, but rather built upon the industriousness of its inhabitants, who were technical pioneers, employing steam-driven machinery, and who amassed considerable wealth, but without succumbing to the restless materialism and divisive individualism that so many Europeans considered a Yankee pathology." Moreover, she commented on their leader, George Rapp, as a man whose name had appeared in many newspapers, but who was judged so differently. What Luise Weil referred to is Father Rapp's depiction in newspapers abroad and at home as an uneducated narcissist who ruled with an iron fist over 3 consecutive communities, each housing as many as 1,000 souls, and his description as a gentle soul who could tame a wild bear with patience and kindness. Unquestionably, George Rapp was a charismatic figure, taller than 6 feet, who knew how to subject his will on hundreds of people without the use of external force. Indeed, his authority was so all-encompassing, so great, that he eventually would lead his community to extinction by imposing celibacy. Perhaps these facts should take first billing, but there was another side to George Rupp, namely that of a self-taught patriarch, an entrepreneur of sorts, who was familiar with the works of Renaissance physicians, South America explorers, and enlightened philosophers. To name a few, he read Paracelsus, or at least came across the copy. He imported many books to New Harmony. He also read Kant. He met with Kerner, who was one of the revolutionaries of the pre-1841 revolution in Germany. He also had knowledge and read works or heard about works of Pestalozzi. Without a doubt, Rupp was an intelligent man with excellent craftsmanship skills. In his youth, he had worked on his father's farm, and there's a picture, in the small town of Iptingen, in the fertile Baden-Württemberg countryside, where he learned how to cultivate wheat, linseed, grapes, vegetables, and how to prune fruit trees. After grade 6, he started a linen weaver apprenticeship. According to custom, Rupp traveled from town to town, visiting master workshops until he had honed his skills to pass the apprenticeship examination. So despite his humble beginnings and his inability to speak English in later years, he would secure support from the powerful on 2 continents and articulate and accumulate extraordinary wealth. Indeed, Rupp was a man with strong convictions and rhetorical skills, who for many years had played cat and mouse with the German authority to the degree that they would change the law in favor of the Harmonists to prevent the community from leaving Württemberg. And once he had arrived in the United States, he managed to meet with the president, Thomas Jefferson, in Washington, D.C., to request land for his people. It goes without saying that George Rupp was a man who had inherited Swabian entrepreneurial instincts and the quickness to apply German material culture to the conditions in America. He was prepared to replace the chaos in Europe for his communal ideals and in favor of a religious pragmatism that would offer prosperity and freedom of religion. In 1803, Rupp and his exploration team arrived on the shores of America. From Baltimore, he euphorically reported home as a new citizen of the United States. He did not have the citizenship, of course, by that time. And I quote, "This is very rich land. Everything grows sufficiently. Here, everything is held in common. All people are good towards each other. One must admire the friendship. Whoever wants to work here can obtain enough wealth. There is no tent here, and there is religious freedom enough. Here, they laugh about a person who speaks of parties. To be free from military training, you must pay $1 a year. Cattle here is larger than with us. Also the horses. Women ride like men. It is all the same. There are wonderful birds here. You may shoot them to eat. Every person may do so. Game belongs to every man. And here one also meets good souls who do not despise the word of the cross." George Rupp's enthusiasm for America was justified. Although his community faced many obstacles, they arrived with a considerable amount of capital, organizational skills, know-how, determination, and faith. Aside from owning communal savings, Rupp intended to lay a solid foundation for his community by investing in land to guarantee a steady flow of income. To accomplish his goal, he banked on a meticulous social and economic model that was machine-like and in perpetual motion for his divine economy to rest upon. In his publication on the destiny of men, he closely linked a healthy economy to physical and spiritual self-determination and the idea that development and progress would necessarily lead to profits. In order to create perpetual labor processes that would bring about physical prosperity and salvation, Rupp and his community willingly operated within 3 distinctive spheres, namely in an inner communal socialist sphere, an overarching millennial spiritual sphere, and an outer venture capitalist sphere. While the communal socialist sphere and sorry, while the communal socialist and overarching millennial spiritual spheres were inwardly directed, focusing on togetherness and equality, the third sphere of venture capitalism was directed towards the outside world and the ability of a select few to harvest profits for the common good. By following this model, living standards within the inner communal socialist sphere soon resembled those of the 19th century petite bourgeoisie in Europe. As part of the lower middle class, the harmonists provided employment and they generated new jobs to stimulate innovation. Whether or not class consciousness came into play, the successful operation of this model was achieved through strong spiritual and practical leadership, a clearly defined spherical boundaries that could be recognized and obeyed by all. The first sphere that I will talk about, namely the inner communal socialist sphere, referred to the realm of harmonist life where its members practiced a version of communal socialism while shielding themselves from the influences of the outside world. Even though there were no physical borders present and commerce was conducted with outsiders, the inner communal socialist sphere was marked by self-imposed isolation, cooperative ownership, self-sufficiency, hard work, and the use of a foreign language and millennial beliefs. This sphere was utterly self-contained in regards to food, medicine, housing, and entertainment. While the community aspired to an order based on egalitarian and collectivist principles, gender and skills-based divisions did exist, but monetary equality was achieved by 1818. Startup capital was directed towards land purchases and new business developments that resulted in higher living standards. The harmonists carefully monitored the distribution of food and clothing, access to education, entertainment, and housing, and the optimal utilization of membership skills and qualifications. Upon their arrival in the United States, they built log cabins which were soon replaced by two-story brick buildings. Friedrich List, a German-American economist and author of The National System of Political Economy, 1841, who visited the harmonists in 1825, described the community's self-sufficiency and sharing mechanism as follows. Flour is handed out as much as each needs. Chicken and poultry everyone keeps in his own garden. Whoever is sick is sent to the doctor. Whoever torn shoes, etc., no account is kept. The relatively high standard of living was further improved by the procurement of healthier living conditions unheeded in other frontier communities. The harmonists raised health standards and sanitary conditions by providing medical care and by controlling the water supply to include the separation of spring and well water for drinking and river water for cultivation and cleaning purposes. While special provisions were made for the community's physical welfare and for the business expansion, every aspect of daily life was permeated by religious routine that consisted of work and prayer. With this, Rupp created a symbiosis of eschatological beliefs and pragmatic worldviews that were sustained by increased economic prosperity. Furthermore, the success of this model served Rupp as a justification for leaving Germany, striving for perfection, and preparing the community for the second coming of Christ. Let's take a closer look at the harmonist path from agriculture to manufacturing that basically went between the inner social sphere and the outer venture capitalist sphere. When the harmonists left Europe, they left behind a free capitalist system only to develop a capitalist economy whereby land became the principal means of production. Based on a heritage of skilled labor and economic shrewdness, they soon transitioned from self-sustaining farming practices to frontier marketing, to manufacturing, and eventually to global enterprising. The expansion of investments commenced with the purchase of land and the introduction of hybrid agrarian models that included the cultivation of local crops and new varieties from abroad. I took these pictures in 2010 from fields in the area of Ipingen. They again started cultivating the line seed, and there's still a lot of rapeseed being cultivated. In addition, the harmonists paid special attention to the economy of espalier fruit and exotic tree variations such as figs, oranges, and lemon. In their cottage gardens, which were modeled after monastery gardens, there is a picture of the monastery of Maulbronn, which Rapp visited frequently when he had to appear before the authorities, and the principal park in Stuttgart and Ludwigsburg that he referenced in letters. The harmonists grew hardy vegetables that included beets, cabbage, celery, turnips, carrots, cucumbers, eggplant, leeks, shallots, beans, potatoes, and peas. To add to their self-reliance, they had refined the art of preserving vegetables by using pickling techniques, basement storage for the winter that included covering vegetables in sand, and the drying of herbs and smoking varieties of meat. In addition, these gardens included herbs for medicinal purposes and flowers that would adorn their homes and factories. In a very short time, farming surpluses laid the foundation for the opening of a general store, an inn, and small trade shops. Indeed, according to Margaret Ewing, the harmonist store was stocked with all the essentials that settlers and pioneers needed to survive on the rugged frontier, and such as, and I quote, furs and hides, wax, livestock, textiles, honey, cheese and butter, household utensils, shoes, hats, books, harnesses, barrels, and farm implementation. In addition to the local economy, the harmonists discovered lucrative new markets, such as selling whiskey to the US Army and brewing harmonist beer. I think we still can enjoy that here in town. Within 5 years, they had constructed mills, a brewery, and a granary, thus creating the foremost frontier market in the state of Indiana. Although agriculture remained an important part of harmonist life, the introduction of innovative labor-saving machines opened new branches of industry. And I quote Ewing, "It is no surprise that some of the first steam engines to be used in the West were located in New Harmony, and innovations in machinery and commercial techniques were introduced under the careful guidance of Frederick Rupp. New Harmony became an important asset to the general area, providing valuable services for people, such as ginning cotton and milling flour." Here's a picture of a wool carding machine, and also much later, of course, the first fire engine designed by the harmonists. The fascination for men's ability to activate and control machinery and thus create continuous productivity in an assembly-line fashion remained a recurring theme in George Rupp's Destiny of Man. In his treatise, he referred to those human beings with special mechanical abilities as heavenly creatures. In 1809, the harmonists once again showed true entrepreneurial courage when they imported merino sheep into the United States. They were successful in breeding them and eventually had more than 1,000 woolen cloth, and when the Embargo Act in 1807 and the Non-Intercourse Act of 1809 happened, the demand for domestic cloth existed and the harmonists had no difficulty marketing their own product. The production of high-quality cloth eventually led to the manufacture of an even finer textile, namely silk. In 1827, when the community had relocated to Pennsylvania, George Rupp's 19-year-old granddaughter, Gertrude, was instrumental in the establishment of a highly profitable silk industry. In 1839, the harmonists produced about 100 pounds of textiles annually, such as satin, brocade, silk, and velvet. In the years that followed, the vast production output could not be met with prevailing labor resources because the community had aged and few members remained. However, before the community had reached that point, they had relied on seasonal labor to improve living conditions and to staff the picking machines in the factories. Decades later, after George Rupp's death, a major labor dispute arose that tested the community's spiritual and social consciousness. And this, of course, was in Pennsylvania. In the 1870s, the management of Beaver Falls Cutlery, a Harmonist-owned company, hired 300 Chinese immigrant workers on a 4-year contract for low wages and substandard living conditions to help meet production demands. This move infuriated the white labor force, who feared layoffs and who felt that the color of their skin should protect them from heathen labor. It also set a bill in motion to prohibit Chinese contract labor in the United States, which eventually died in the House Committee on Federal Relations. While the Harmonists tried to distance themselves from the conflict, they soon were faced with an angry council of 100 who called on their common heritage and the Harmonists' paternal responsibility. As the dispute prolonged, they were under pressure to choose between their social obligations, capital interests, and their spiritual beliefs. In the end, the Harmonists took the spiritual high road and presented the arrival of the Chinese labor force as the fulfillment of a biblical prophecy. Furthermore, they bribed the workers into submission. Now let's take a look at the final sphere, namely the outer venture capitalist sphere. This sphere was exceptionally well managed by a few communal experts who moved freely about and who were quick to apply German material culture to new conditions in America. They established a highly effective labor force trained in the German tradition that included skilled and master craftsmen and academic experts. Furthermore, they believed in diversified modes of production, such as agriculture, manufacture, and venture capital endeavors. This diversification proved utmost valuable when the Panic of 1819 broke upon the nation, and particularly the West suffered a severe economic depression. When the Harmonists interacted with the outside world, they didn't shy away from contracting professional support for their businesses. They commissioned lawyers, bankers, and agents who helped to explore new markets and to distribute products in 22 states and foreign countries. Since the Harmonists lived in a hermetically sealed society, one would assume that politics was off limits, but much to the contrary. During local elections, they organized in block voting to secure economic and political benefits for the community. Moreover, Rupp's granddaughter Gertrude pleaded with the government to halt silk imports from abroad, and I quote, "This new and most important branch of national industry is indeed to convince our patriots that our own people's hands themselves can produce and manufacture this highly beloved article of luxury. One may justly feel a noble pride, but if the product of foreign hands, we have best reason in the world to feel a notable shame when we reflect that by the way of obtaining it, we have not much so and so unpatriotically contributed to squandering our national treasure." Gertrude's involvement in politics was based on the awareness of international trade policies and a sharp sense of local politics. The Harmonist interest in political issues received further attention when they managed to establish the first German or Württemberg consulate in the city of Baltimore. The Harmonists had run into problems when they transferred inheritance assets from the state of Württemberg into their treasury in the United States. Over the years, the resolve of transatlantic property disputes had proven difficult without diplomatic recourse. It involved frequent visits to Germany and the need of highly specialized lawyers who understood foreign law and who could speak the language. During a visit to Württemberg to settle another inheritance matter, the Harmonists finally caught the ear of the king to suggest the establishment of a German consulate in the United States, which eased further transaction. And the way they talked the king into it, they said that the French had already 2 consulates in the United States. In addition to establishing diplomatic networks, the Harmonists banked on loyal and strategically well-positioned financial experts for advice. In fact, in 1825, during a bank crisis, and upon the recommendation of J. Solms, a banker in Philadelphia, they withdrew approximately $15,000 in gold and silver, only to store it in economy for safekeeping. In order to gain total control over the commercial organization of their markets, the Harmonists set up a bank and even offered to bail out the state of Indiana at a 6% interest rate. In later years, after the community had returned to Pennsylvania, the Harmonists expanded their investments to include factories, oil drilling companies, and railroads. By 1860, only 1 year after Edwin L. Drake had built the first U.S. oil rig in Titusville, the Harmonists struck oil in economy. The community added considerable assets to their oil profits when the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad in Ohio opened in 1877. For its construction, the Harmonists had invested $650,000, and when it was sold to the Vanderbilts in 1884, they received the incredible sum of $1,150,000. Over the next years, the community increased its assets by investing in 9 major companies, including steel, coal, glass, and in the car industry. It was not, however, until 1903, exactly 100 years after George Rupp had set foot in America, that the community sold off the town of Economy, approximately 2,523 acres of land, to the Liberty Land Company for the fabulous sum of $2.5 million. There can be no doubt that it was precisely the successful negotiation of these 3 distinctive spheres of communal sharing, capitalist venturing, and spirituality that Rupp had alluded to in his essay that paved the way to remarkable riches while awaiting for the second coming of Christ. But how did posterity interpret and judge George Rupp's utopianism? In 1847, when Rupp died, the Pittsburgh Morning Daily Post eulogized him as the greatest communist of the age. The statement in the Morning Daily Post was preceded by comments from Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, who remarked that Rupp had reduced menial labor and eliminated strife and discord in the workplace. While renowned socialists and the local press acknowledged Rupp's labor contributions within the inner socialist sphere, they hardly mentioned the community's venture capitalist exploits that contributed to the industrial development of the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. In the decade that followed, much attention shifted to the Harmonists as a uniquely spiritual and religious experiment, thereby neglecting their distinct social model, entrepreneurial ingenuity, organizational talent, and selective cultural adaptability to their new country that ultimately defines their role in American history. Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Sylvia?
One of the challenges that the Owen Society had whenever they set up their socialist model, or at least what they called the socialist model, was that they attracted a lot of people who were not very hardworking and so on and so forth. How did the Harmonist community handle work or carrying their share, or how did they handle that? Because there were other immigrants from Germany that joined in after they arrived here. How did they handle that? Do you know?
First of all, he kept a very close control over his people by not letting them speak English. So I think that was the main factor for the success of the community as is. Because the more you have contact with the outside world, the harder it is to remain a structure, an order, a place.
If they could speak English, then they could leave.
Of course, they would see the outside world, they could venture out. And there were very, very few members of the community that actually participated in that outside sphere. And they were very devout members of
when George Raft set foot on in the United States, did they encounter the Native Americans?
I understand there were not that many here at the time in Indiana. It may be, Carla, you know more about it. This was not a settled.
Area, Native American settled area, as far as I know. So,
And they also had moved west. Don, I think, knows better too. But as far as I know, they had moved west already by the time that Rock came here.
Gertrude Rapp was a phenomenal woman. When you speak about restricting languages, she communicated in English and French with the silk weavers in those respective countries. So that was phenomenal. She also knew sericulture and introduced the silk industry here at New Albany. She won 3 medals from the government there at Old Economy. And so, I mean, this was absolutely extraordinary for someone who initially grew up in Iptingen.
Well, she got educated with the Quakers, and so she was one of the few people who learned English. And yes, and Rupp obviously liked her very much and gave her free rein in a lot of ways. Yeah. And she also worked with
Italian.
silk experts.
Okay, thank you. Now we are going to thank you again.